Hi everyone, it's me again, and Squish Gang is present. And today, what am I doing? And today, we're going to be talking about this kind of concept of the role model epidemic. And this thing is kind of been going on in online discourse a lot lately in the past year and a half or so, especially with children being adversely affected by the pandemic and the rise of things like manosphere content. Also, but on the other end, too, things like youth participating in activist movements like BLM, protests of the overturn of Roe v. Wade, and other leftist movements as well. Kind of this culture war that's been existing on both sides and how the children are perceived in all of this. Also, of course, the other factors as well. But first, links, sources, Amazon, Patreon, ways to support the channel, all linked down below, including the link for today's sponsor, Aura, and which we'll get to a little bit in a second. Any other links to makeup and things that I'm wearing, etc. So, parts of the video. Part 1, we're going to be defining the role model epidemic. Part 2, we're going to be doing internet figures and their response, like their responsibilities to youth and kind of how everything's been going. And part 3, the kind of left and right furthering the divide. Before we get into all that, let's talk about today's sponsor, Aura. First, I would like to thank Aura for sponsoring this video. So anyone can find your personal information online, including your legal name, phone number, email address, personal addresses, and even the addresses of those that you love. This information is accessible because of data brokers who then sell your information to scammers, telemarketers, robocallers, things like that. Aura is a US-based service that helps you manage your online security. Despite being from Canada, I've looked into this service, and I really think it is worth it for those that are able to access it. If anybody remembers, I was hacked last October, and my channel was taken by a few of these people in Russia, it seems like. Advocating for things like online security is something that I'm legitimately passionate about, because if I was more aware of it and had more control over it, maybe things like that would not have happened. And two, just in general, things like spam calls, spam emails, and those types of things are just genuinely an annoyance that I have to face on a daily basis at this point. And if I knew where my information was going and who had it, then I could end up not having to deal with this. Aura will identify data brokers that are exposing your information and automatically submit opt-out requests on your behalf. And they'll even opt you out of things like junk mail and telemarketing. You can use my link, aura.com/Rhetoric, to get a free 2-week trial to see how many brokers have access to your information. The link will also be in the top of the description. Aura has a ton of features as well, including VPN, password management, real-time credit checks, credit scores and things like that, identity theft monitoring, internet parental controls, and malware protection. It is almost every single internet security tool you need, but all in one place. With the link in the description, once again, aura.com/Rhetoric, you can start your free trial for Aura today, and you'll be shocked about how much of your private information is actually out there and that Aura is able to find and help you manage. Again, as someone who was hacked, I have to say how important online security is and just how helpful and the weight off your shoulders you can have from being able to know where your information has been. Thank you again to Aura for sponsoring today's video, and let's get into part 1. So part 1, we're going to be defining the epidemic that I've aligned here and why I'm kind of using something as dramatic as the word epidemic. So what do I mean when I'm saying something so inflammatory? Well, for one, there's this constant worry for the current state of the world. However, this has been a case throughout history. Current state of interest towards youth development in more of a social manner really took off in the 1960s and 1970s with the, unfortunately again, the Reagan era, which I mentioned in my last video that I was going to be bringing up Reagan a lot for some reason. It's just because the conversations I'm having right now are really relevant. And also because I am like really deep into this book. That's why all the tabs are in it. Jesus and John Wayne. And many of the practices of this kind of fear for the youth and the family dynamic have shaped modern conservative culture. In 1970, an as of yet little-known child psychologist named James Dobson published a small book, Dare to Discipline. Its subject matter was deceptively mundane, how to discipline children. Dobson decided to write the book after seeing too many troubled children in the 1960s come through the doors of his clinic, believing that their problems could be traced to the breakdown of the social order, the sexual revolution, divorce, and the disintegration of family. Dobson began dispensing old-fashioned parenting advice on Judeo-Christian values to church and PTA groups, advice he then published in his book. Repudiating the pessimistic approach to child rearing championed by his recently retired, widely celebrated Dr. Benjamin Spock, Dobson encouraged parents to reassert authority over unruly children. Spanking was a good way to accomplish this, and Dobson offered detailed instructions. He advised using a belt or switch and keeping the implement in plain sight to remind children that insubordination brought consequences. He made clear that it wasn't necessary to beat the child in submission. A little pain went a long way. Dobson's authority rested on this training as a psychologist, but his evangelical faith informed his ideas about childbearing. Whereas Dr. Spock promoted nurturing approach to parenthood, advising parents to trust their instincts and treat their child with affection and leniency. Dobson saw children as naturally sinful creatures, inclined towards defiance and rebellion. He also may have been inspired by his own childhood to believe that seemingly innocent children required stern discipline to keep them straight and narrow. So this is that idea of, children have always been this idea that we need to save the children. We got to find the best possible process of managing the children and the rebellion that they're going to have. And these kids have so many problems. So saying that, because a lot of old people nowadays, right, will be saying things like, oh, these children are hopeless in my day, blah, 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 blah. That's always been the case. They were the same conversation for people born in the 30s. The people born in the 30s were the same conversation people born in the 1870s or whatever it may be. It's nothing new. Now, why do I make the point to kind of reference the Ronald Reagan era again? I'm trying to demonstrate that this feeling is not uncommon across generations. Reagan talked about himself, the hippie youth, and then now you have the entitled millennials, and also now you had the entitled millennials. That was kind of a big conversation. Now that people in Gen Z, my age, or my generation, are adults now, you're getting these kind of rude, entitled, crazed Zoomers, right? In hopes to shape generations into culturally carbon copies of the past, there has been this concept of the role model introduced. Typically, this is someone who instills cultural values of the previous generation. That is something that I have noticed, right? Even if you're thinking about people like Andrew Tate, the value of men need to provide, men need to be strong, and that is what this book talks about a lot when we're talking about fundamentalist Christian values. Even though Andrew Tate, I understand, is a Muslim now, that is still a Judeo-Christian kind of construct, but also to mention that it can span across more conservative and places and other religions as well. So the reason I brought everything together and call this kind of an epidemic is because I find that this is a once-in-a-generation crisis that sweeps through, that is somewhat similar in the process, but it's always in somewhat different forms. A sickness, but with different symptoms. In this case, the repeated feelings across different generations, but with the shift in media and exposure, the way that these kind of issues come to rise and the feelings that people have can be a little bit different. So let's bring it back to modern day, right? What symptoms are present there? There is a slight difference because of social media and the existence of kind of the internet and things like that. The main distinguishing factor I have noticed is instead of powerful people being able to kind of just pick a role model or pick somebody that they want to uplift, it is still that very much, but then you also kind of have these niche communities that can uplift somebody based on their beliefs and what they want to bring forward. So these communities can all take their roles, right? The makeup gurus, the crypto bros, the LA influencers, tech reviewers, pop culture writers, you name it, right? You can have now all these different groups that will uplift a certain individual to kind of have this role model status. And even I've had some people that call me a sort of role model, even though I'm obviously very, very, very niche. My kind of joke in real life is I'm a incredibly niche micro internet celebrity. And with all these people being able to come out of the woodwork, I've kind of pronounced this role an epidemic because, again, like I said, it's kind of a sickness that's happened a bunch of different times, but in slightly different forms. But also because I find that now you can just kind of, role model can be thrown around a lot more because it kind of depends on your age and opinions and niche, and it's not just a select few uplifted in traditional media that can bring these people forward. Because part 2, now we're going to specify a little bit more of the internet figures and the response to youth. So when you're talking about role models in the 21st century, there are obviously going to be certain elephants in the room. But again, looking back at this current crisis, it's kind of just history repeating itself. Because I think back to 2017, right? And the era of the Jake Paulers and the Mavericks and the Rice Gum babies. I don't know what Rice's, I don't know what Rice Gum's fan base was called. But the rhetoric around the manosphere content is what is particularly of highest concern right now. Because the manosphere content entirely revolves around not disliking 50% of the population is what a lot of people say. I'd say more realistically like 80% of the population, because it wouldn't only include women, but it would include non-cis men, gender non-conforming people, and I guess, the more sissy men, Even though, for example, my 6'5" boyfriend who likes to go to Home Depot has dyed hair and likes to sew, doesn't make him any less of a man than somebody who plays a sport. But I think, the Andrew Tate types would disagree. Because they're specifically looking at cis straight men with no features or interests that could be considered even remotely feminine. And I guess you could also probably argue that the manosphere content could also include a certain form of subservient cis female that, I would assume these men would find appealing. Couldn't be me. It's weird because you get a lot of these comments when you're like a woman making content online, especially if you criticize any sort of like manosphere type dealios, where they're like, I don't want to have sex with you, as their like main argument. I'm like, you're a faceless, probably child loser who's trying to come at me in the comments of the video that I made money on and you didn't. To be like, hey bitch, you should want to desire me. Even if you strike rich on some sort of scheme that Logan Paul allegedly in Minecraft hypothetically insider traded, in Minecraft allegedly, I still wouldn't want to be with you because of the values that you subscribe to. This is my little lip thingy, I'm just playing with it. And now I have to be a little bit more careful with disclosing my experiences here. With the people like Andrew Tate and Sneeko and stuff, it does rub off on them. I have heard the terms free the top G. However, I find it doesn't truly internalize in the way that a lot of people foresee it to. And while it might seem reductionist, I think people don't realize how much girls matter to the kids that are this age. Like 13-year-old boys, for example, 14, 15, whatever. Right? Like high school age boys. That's what a lot of the fan base is. Girls really matter to them. And girls don't like when guys are into people that hate them, right? Like Andrew Tate thinks women are inherently less competent, less intelligent, have less worth, right? Girls don't want to feel that way from the guys that they're with. Like there are countless people where they'll be on like social media and they're like, oh, found out this guy is a Andrew Tate fan, I don't talk to him anymore, right? So you can talk all the smack you like, but you still kind of want to impress girls. And you can't really impress girls from spewing lines from someone who hates them. These are at least things that I've been able to observe in my 22 years on this earth. My lifespan or whatever. And this reality comes through even further than just young people. I think that people need to understand that it's actually quite common to have these phases. And the main important part of this is to give people grace to grow beyond these opinions. Because those that are not granted grace can then be pushed into the cycle of further perpetuating these thoughts. Because if they do not immediately resonate with what you tell them, I have noticed that throughout their life, they will then refuse that notion. If you tell somebody to change and be really negative and don't really allow them the space to, then they just never will. Sometimes it literally just takes patience. And I think if you can see based on the generational developments of this constant fear of the youth and all this kind of stuff that they won't amount to anything, whatever, and that proves time and time again at every generation to not really be true, I think that you need to kind of think back to history and take a step back and really give these kids the time. I think there's an issue online, more so with the left, that expects an unrealistic level of moral perfection and this constant game of like checking people. While this is useful online, given this kind of lack of regulation and the extent that people can go to, it often ignores the pinnacle steps of like social and emotional development, as well as intellectual development that a lot of especially young people will have. And it makes it hard for them to be accepted into the growing process. To make this very simple, I'm going to read off my line. I actually think the kids will be fine as long as we're nice to them. Give them the space to grow, correct as you go, assert that maybe, let them kind of know that maybe they'll learn over time. But I don't think it's as deep and dark of a chasm or this, because left-wing people are annoying, the right wing can just get all these kids and blah, 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 blah. I don't think it's that simple. And I think you need to hear from somebody, and I hate being like, I'm the greatest person. No. But as somebody who, has studied this and has looked into it and has worked in certain environments that kind of I can see where these kind of patterns of behavior come up. I've also worked at things like summer camps and stuff in the past. I've worked at I've done like tutoring stuff. I've worked at the university in orientations. I've done a lot of different jobs and stuff like that. I think you need to be careful with how quickly you want to disregard something, because that's what we're going to get to for part 3 is the left versus right kind of furthering the divide. Because I've seen a lot of discourse online saying that one of the reasons that the far right has kind of risen in fame to the extent it has is because of the nature of the left and how they're like incredibly unforgiving. Because people are arguing that there's a so-called side to blame for this. Again, this is nothing new. Like Reagan with the hippies, right? I'm going to hugely paraphrase from Veils of Distortion, another book that I have here, because I've actually read this part before. But there's an idea of forcing or blaming an opposition in the media that is done for kind of a scandalous nature to make things that typically wouldn't be that exciting, like super boring parliamentary meetings or passing new laws or watching paint dry, it feels like at this point. They will kind of force an opposition in order to make it a bit more interesting. Kind of like the epic memes of the 2020 Trump versus Biden election, right? They're making this huge oppositional feeling so that it kind of drives more attention. However, this then resonates with the people that consume media, which is most people in the Western world. Because each side creates these forced fights in their own ways, whether you like to admit it or not. And I am not right-wing for saying the left does things bad, nor am I left-wing for only saying the right wing does things bad. I am left-wing because of my own personal values and my own constructs and things that I support. And I'm not going to let people on the internet tell me what my beliefs are when I actually know them. That is another thing that I find people are too insecure in, and that causes a lot of these issues. So on the right, I find people will incite these like culture wars where they kind of create these inflammatory topics or frustrations on things that don't matter and nobody ever asked them to. Because some examples include, Tucker Carlson versus M&M's, conservatives versus drag queen story hour, Candace Owens versus Nikocado Avocado, the whole thing with the Black Little Mermaid or whatever. Did that movie ever come out? What's going on with that? Anyways, Ben Shapiro's wet-ass P-word. There was like a black character in like the new Lord of the Rings show or whatever, lesbian couple that were like 2 frames in that Disney movie, and like the list goes on. Okay, those are just some examples I was able to ring off the top of my head. When looking at the left, it's quite interesting because the right is inciting wars on the left, but then a lot of the time the left is inciting wars on the left, because it's true whether you like it or not. Because for example, I see Twitter explode on what feels like a daily basis. If you even breathe the names Hassan, Vosh, Kefevels, Shoe on Head, the Young Turks. Yes, and I'm not saying some of these are always left or the left or the other. But see, that's the thing. I'm going to start getting comments like this. I don't care. I don't care. That's not the point. People will discredit the totality of your views based on content that they feel that they are consuming. And that's happened a few times myself. Back to the role model issue and how it aligns. It feels like if kids choose leftist role models, they'll be absolved in this cycle of never being enough. But then many of the role models on the right will not acknowledge your mistakes to kind of gather new people. The right can also be more accepting because it has clear endpoints that are obvious. If you just exercise, if you just follow my Ponzi scheme, if you just do whatever, that you can easily achieve this ideal life. And I think that is why people are flocking to it at a young age. But then I do believe in people's understandings to be able to develop past that. So while I do not think the left has necessarily forced out any sort of figures, I think I've shown historically that these differences have existed beyond social media, and that there is sort of clear endpoint in the right that seems to resonate more with at least young boys, but that does end up kind of swaying back over time. To conclude, concept of the role model has lasted for a really long time, and I think we kind of just need to let the cycle go and maybe just step back and acknowledge and correct people in our personal lives that we have access to, or, advocate where you want to advocate, and just take things one step at a time. Links, sources, Amazon wish list, that stuff, Patreon, everything, ways to support the channel, all linked down below, including my link to Aura. Thank you for sponsoring again, aura.com/Mika's Rhetoric. And that will be the first link in the description as well. An email to suggest longer form content. And you all have a great day wherever you are, and I'll see you when I see you. Bye.